When the Brian Kohberger case ultimately goes to trial, if that ever happens, the real question now is whether his new expert will have an effective alibi for him.
There's a lot of technology involved, but will it help him or will it hurt him? Will the tech involved incriminate Kohberger, or will it help sustain that he wasn't at the scene of the crime? I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
So we have a lot of back and forth discussion of what technology can prove and what's happening with everything. Was his cell phone on? Was his cell phone off? Is it still tracking the data? And it's led to a lot of questions about everything going on in this case.
Well, I've even heard people say, not only was it on or was it off or was it on and just not pinging the cell towers. I've actually heard people say, one alibi could be that it was in a Faraday bag. Do you think very many of our viewers know what a Faraday bag is?
I've never even heard of that.
I think it's a lead type of a bag that you can put a phone in and it'll remain on, but it will not send out a signal or receive a signal. But, obviously that's kind of ridiculous. I don't think, maybe you never know. In this case, you just don't know what's ridiculous and what's not ridiculous. But, to get serious now, I've read and heard and observed a lot of what people are saying about the new expert in Brian Kohberger's case, Cy Ray. And it seems like there's a bunch of confusion over the technology.
Mm-hmm. And I think it makes a lot of sense, too, because, even when we go about our day-to-day lives, we're not really thinking, are we being tracked? Like, how is our data being shared? And it's interesting because a lot of people, it's not until you need to find out where something or someone is that when you start thinking about how we figure this stuff out. So as regular everyday people, we kind of know that we have little tracking devices in our pockets, but we're not really certain how far that tracking actually goes.
So there are a bunch of different ways that our cell phones, like yours that you just waved in the air, are tracked. And I just thought it was very important to clarify this. A lot of people probably know this, and this is really elementary to some people, and that's fine. Probably most of our viewers already know this, but it's really important to make the distinction between these four ways our phones are tracked. The first one is cell phone triangulation. And obviously that's as you drive around. Let's say you drive from New York to Boston, you go through different states. And as you go from state to state, different cell phones pick you up. Triangulation is exactly what it sounds like. 3 different cell phones pick you up. And from that, you can, pretty much figure out where a person was. And we saw that in the Alex Murdaugh case, self-tower triangulation. The next thing is geolocation. And again, a lot of people know what this is, but there's a bunch of satellites up there. Mm-hmm. They've been there since the 1960s. The military put them up there so that they can track, where people are, what they're doing. They can send a bomb down to, bomb the front door of a facility in some foreign country. So this technology has been around for a long time, but somewhere in the 90s and early 2000s, the commercial people got a hold of it, and now we all have GPS on our phones. So that's geolocation, tracks us all. There's Wi-Fi capture. When you go home and you're in your house, obviously your Wi-Fi follows you around. And then there's Bluetooth pinging. Bluetooth, obviously being what operates your music, your headphones. There were politically. Remember when one of the politicians, I forget who it was, said that some people have to go to McDonald's and sit in the lot to use their Wi-Fi?
Oh, I don't necessarily recall that scenario exactly, but I know that's like a very common thing where it's like people just go to McDonald's just to sit there, use the Wi-Fi for hours. I've fortunately never been in that scenario, but it's interesting to think about. And things like Bluetooth pinging is, even right now as we're talking, I have a Bluetooth headphone, and it reminds me of I don't have a fancy schmancy new car like this, but a lot of people have their cars that when they sit in, it's like their phone and it's like, connected to whoever's phone. And just the radios in your house. So a lot of things connect to Bluetooth that we don't even necessarily realize are connecting in the moment.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember early on, it's not in the probable cause affidavit at all, but one of the newspapers started the rumor that was then repeated in a lot of newspapers that Brian Kohberger actually shook hands with the Bluetooth inside of 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. So that's something that was said. We don't know. We don't know whether that's true or not. But, that can happen. If you drive by my house, maybe your phone will shake hands with my Bluetooth and I'll know that you're out there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just something that does happen. So now we have to... I think we did a good job of doing this, but let's just review before we move on. Cell tower triangulation locates you from cell towers. Geolocation, on the other hand, is something that tracks you from a satellite up above. And so those are two things that are relevant in this case. Mr. Cy Ray is the expert who Ann Taylor brought in to tell us where Mr. Kohberger was. And it is said in the new documentation that apparently Mr. Kohberger's cell data will indicate, that he was not at 1122 King Road on the night of the crimes. And so I parsed, everybody's mentioned this. This is not beating a dead horse. This is taking a deeper dive into it. I took a deeper look into Mr. Ray's curriculum vitae. And as we'd mentioned before, this is a direct quote. He was with ZX Corporation. He developed and implemented a national cell tower database. So, I guess he has a list of all the cell towers where they are. That's a lot. Even in the little town I live in, I think there's a dozen of them.
I'm curious if there's a certain way, like a certain service that has them. I mean, I think nowadays it's just like you'll find the library for everything. So I wouldn't be too surprised if there was something that marked out all the cell towers that they're pulling that information from. I don't know.
I don't know. He couldn't have just driven around, but anyhow, this says that the database has coverage areas defined for each sector, over 3.1 million coverage overlays, extensive RF mapping and link budget analysis completed in multiple environments. So that's where we start with Mr. Ray's software. We start out with it basically doing the triangulation of the cell towers. But then we go a little bit further in his curriculum vitae, and we see this quote under other experience. Subject matter expert in call detail record analysis, historical tracking, real-time physical tracking of mobile devices, geolocation, site surveys, and RF identification. So the question is whether he's going to use both of those technologies, the cell tower triangulation and the geo tracking. In a previous episode, we pointed out that Mr. Ray's technology was thrown out of a court in Colorado. And I saw somebody commenting saying that was reversed. No, it was not reversed because I ran it through my legal research and that was a good decision. But Mr. Ray has had a mixed experience in court many, many years. We told you in our previous episode that he worked for police. He's a former police sergeant. So he has a lot of experience as a police officer in police management. And then he got into this software business. So the software has had some questions in the courts over the years. And the question is whether his software and his expert testimony will be allowed in the Idaho court. And sitting at home, don't just say, oh, of course. No. The courts have to review any expert and technical data with a database to figure out whether it's reliable and whether it's been used by others and proven itself in the past. So I want to show you what's happened with Mr. Ray's technology elsewhere. Here is one case that I have to make larger for myself so that I can read it. There we go. in one United States District Court case, his technology was actually thrown out. And this is a 2022 case, so it's recent, since the pandemic and only a couple of years ago. The issue in this case was whether tracks could be assessed for reliability. Prosecutors offered no testimony on how the TrackX program actually operated or how it has been received by the scientific community. So this is a quote from this case in the United States District Court. Given the court's inability to assess the reliability of the disputed locations and ranges produced by TrackX, the rules of evidence demand the exclusion of the results of an, quote, indecipherable computer program. So the bottom line here was that the TrackX software analysis was excluded.
That sounds to me how it says an indecipherable computer program. The first thing that one of my thoughts goes to is AI, and that fits in another bill where I was thinking, how is it able to identify these people and where it's going? Because that sounds like a lot of personal information, but I wonder if it has things kind of going on within itself, because that's one of the biggest issues that people have with AI, is that it's kind of the black box theory where nobody knows how it's made or what's going on, because it just kind of works behind the scenes and you can't track how it's figuring out what it's doing.
Do you think anybody knows how any software program works?
Yeah, I hope I know my software. I hope I know the programs I make.
I mean, I know in the old days, I'm old enough to remember the old typewriters, clickety clackety clickety, and you'd type something up, or the office assistants would type something up, and then you get out your whiteout. And so when word processing came along, oh my gosh, was that the greatest thing since sliced bread? But I don't know how it works. How am I supposed to know?
I don't know how we got this far as a society, because old programming, and maybe some people watching may remember this, you used to have to write on punch cards, and you'd have boxes, boxes full of punch cards that you would feed in. I don't know how technology became as advanced as it is.
Well, they were called IBM cards, and I remember them because I worked my way through college and school in part as a data punch operator. And, I actually worked at a couple of big firms, but as a lowly little data punch person, you go in at the end of the day and you'd sit at a machine, and they would actually give you reams of paper that had been filled out during the day. And the lowly data punch guy, me, would, enter all the stuff in. And at the end of my shift, there was a big pile of these, IBM cards is what we called them. And they were on card stock. This is a bad example, but I like to write stuff down on index cards. They were made out of this, maybe a little bit thicker material, but they were bigger. So this is actually a really good analogy, because what we're talking about here is actually the police get all this raw data. Okay, Lainey Law was pinging on that tower out there. Then she was pinging on that tower over there. Then she was pinging on that tower over there. So they have all this raw data of where you pinged in the towers. What this software does is it takes this data, the present day analogy of those old cards, and then it can kind of track, oh, you drove here, you drove there, you drove to the mall, you drove to, wherever. So that's the advantage of this software, is it takes the raw data that a data and electronic nerd can sit there for 3 hours on a podcast and analyze it. And that's fine for techie people and engineers. But to show a jury, So what this software does is it puts it all together, and it makes a display using Google Maps, actually. It uses Google Maps, and it shows that you went down this street and that street and the other. So it's very helpful if it's accurate. But as we pointed out in case number 1, the court had serious problems and said, no, we're not going to let it in.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting to me, because you would think that, how it said indecipherable, you would think that something with a paper trail that a phone is leaving, that it would be pretty clear cut. So I'm not an expert in any tracking and GPS or any of that stuff, but you would think that something like that would be relatively clear cut to see if something actually touched an area, because when you're talking about mapping too, you're going from spot to spot, especially we talked about the geolocation using satellites being able to kind of follow us through. So I don't know. I don't know, little strange.
Well, the problem in case one that we looked at, and I obviously just did a summary there, I just did bullet points, but the problem with the court in the first case that we talked about, and they're both criminal cases, by the way, so it's extremely relevant to any true crime case like the Kohberger case. The problem that the court had was that it was introduced by police officers, and I'm not disparaging police officers. I want law and order, and I want, I want criminals to all be behind bars. But the problem was that the police took all this raw data and stuck it into this software, and the software printed out these maps, and these maps were being shown to the jury. Now, as I explained that might sound a little bit simple, but it's not that simple when you're in court. You've got to prove that everything that you did, it actually goes through a 4-step analysis, that it's reliable and that the science has been tested and peer reviewed and that you can trust it. And that's just a real brief summary of what's called the Kohberger analysis. And that was the problem. The police couldn't explain how the software works. Similar to me not being able to explain to you how WordPerfect or how Word work.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually need a witness to lay the foundation and to authenticate this software. So no, Kohberger true crime fans, this stuff doesn't just get in because somebody says, here's a program, we're going to show it to the jury. So they did resolve the problem, though, lest you ask. And so when the same software was used in a United States District Court in Michigan, the TrackX software evidence did go in, but bullet point 1 indicates that admitting the TrackX evidence was a close call. The court said that TrackX, quote, is testable but not peer-reviewed, unquote. The court said that admitting evidence based on how knowledgeable and compelling Mr. Cy-Ray was as a witness. And so they liked him. In the first case, he didn't go in. Or the first case we cited, we actually have them in reverse order chronologically, but they make sense if you look at them in this way. In this case, Cy-Ray actually went to the court and, as a software creator, and I want to call, what do you call it? Not a manufacturer, but a software.
We're engineers, software developers,
Okay.
software engineers.
Developer, that's the word I wanted, sure. As a software developer, you don't want to have to go to court every time you sell a piece of software because you'll never get anything else done. But anyhow, so he actually went to court and explained the basics, the foundational elements of how his software worked. So bullet point number 4, the court finds that the software is reliable. 5, valid questions about the general acceptance of the underlying science could be explored by cross-examination. So in other words, this court wasn't going to keep the evidence out like the other court did. Any questions that were there, the other side could cross-examine the daylights out of the software person.
It makes sense. I mean, I think that's one of the things how it says it's testable but not peer-reviewed, and that the underlying science could be explored by cross-examination. I think it makes sense to me. That was one of the things that I was wondering about. Because one of the things is that I'm thinking about is that this is all relatively new technology, but at the same time, we've had things like geolocation for, like you said, for over 50 years. So I would be interested in seeing how something like Trax is going to be peer reviewed or tested by other people, because we've only had so much information accessible on our phones for the past 20 years. There's been a lot of development, so it's interesting to see just how technology and courts are going to keep up with each other in general.
So now we kind of get back to our other issue with respect to, do we really know? Is this really going to help us? Do we really know whether Mr. Kohberger was in the park? Did he turn the phone on? Did he turn the phone off? I mean, the prosecution, it's true, never said that he turned it off. They just said that it stopped. The phone stopped reporting to these cell towers. So the question is, if he did turn it off, or if he was out of range of the cell towers, would he still be locatable? Is that a word? locatable? Could they still locate him?
Yeah, the thing is with what I'm having a hard time, and maybe also our commenters can tell us on this, is that with things like phones, it's hard to say if it's tracking you under what circumstances, because if you turn your phone off, it doesn't have access to some information, but if the battery is still there, apparently there's certain apps and things that can run in the background that when you boot up, it will share that information, but it doesn't seem like a universal thing where your phone is always tracking you when it's off. So it seems like some data may be made available. It seems that some might not be. And that's, I think, one of the other things where, like, with the peer reviews and learning more about this subject, is that especially like when you have things like Androids and app and iPhones and Google Pixels and things that have removable batteries, there's just so much variance from each device to each device. That's why one of the things like Bluetooth stuck out to me, because if you have a smartwatch, maybe you turn off your cell phone, but maybe your smartwatch is still tracking your steps, or there's not, it doesn't even have to be a smartwatch. There's so many little gadgets and things that we don't even think about. I mean, we talk about like odometers, before we had our phones, but there's so many other little things that might connect to you that might, maybe your phone's not completely active, but it might pick up on. I mean, a lot of people think about like airplane mode and stuff like that, but even when you're in airplane mode, just because you're not connecting to like your cell towers, you're still able to connect to things like Wi-Fi. So here's variance.
So yeah, that was a good analysis. That the question, I guess, that many people are asking is, suppose either Mr. Kohberger turned his phone off, and we don't know that, or he was in such a remote area, maybe this Wawa Park, that there are no towers to ping, or, he put it in airplane mode, which is, I don't think that that's a strong possibility, nor do I think it's a strong possibility that he put it in a Faraday bag. So let's go back to the first two possibilities. Either he turned it off, or he was somewhere out of range of the cell phone. And I know that, we live in a kind of remote area. There's cities and interstates and everything else, but occasionally, you can get into an area. And I'm thinking of one of the towns that I go through regularly. Between my two offices, there's a back road that I use.
I can't even make phone calls from my house.
Oh my goodness. Well, I can make phone calls from my house, but there's a back road that I like to use between my two offices, because the interstate gets too jammed up, especially on a Friday afternoon. So I take a little back road, and there's an area, there's a dead spot, and it's always been there. Mm-hmm. It's always been there. So I tell people, if I get I guess I shouldn't even say this, because you're not supposed to be using a handheld phone in your car. So I'm using my Bluetooth in my car.
Hands-free device.
But there's still a dead spot. There is still a 2024. If I'm talking to somebody on my Bluetooth, of course, if I'm talking to somebody on my phone, I warn them. I say, look, I'm coming up to a dead spot. And if they keep talking, then, anyhow. Well, so go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that sorry, not to interrupt, but it kind of reminds me in one of my psychotic search adventures where I start thinking about the kids that I may or may not have. I'm like, well, if you have a kid, how do you track their location all the time?
Right.
And, basically at the end of the day, what I came down to is that it's just like people are tracking their kids only using their phone, because Bluetooth isn't going to work if you're beyond, like 100 feet or something like that. And that anything that is going to accurately track a child as they roam around the world needs to be having like a cell service or something that's connecting at all times. That being said, I was reading, one parent talking about her experience where it's just like even things like the phones, like even when you're tracking the data, aren't that reliable because they update at different times. So she has 3 kids, they might all be together, but it'll show like each kid at each separate interval of the, like how they're getting to their place, because maybe one has their phone off and it hasn't updated, or maybe one's still searching or one's connected to Wi-Fi. So things like that. So there's like, and we've mentioned in previous episodes where people who are playing Pokemon Go will see their character run off into the abyss because they don't have cell phone service. So it thinks they're somewhere completely different. And there's a lot of things that can get mixed up.
So you raised two issues. One is, if someone like Mr. Kohberger is out of cell phone reach, suppose he goes, and I just talked about how I go through a dead spot. Suppose he goes to Wawa Park and he's running or whatever he's doing and he's out of service. That's issue number one. Is there still geolocation data? The answer is yes, but is this expert's software going to be able to pick it up? But issue number two, you talk about people with kids, if they have a cell phone, they can track them. Now, I don't want to be too ridiculous, but Lily the dog, my dog, who has starred in these episodes before, she's chipped. So she's never been lost, knock on wood. And I hope she never gets lost. But they almost really make you get a chip when you get a dog these days. And so she has a chip. There have been people who unsuccessfully have argued that babies should get chips. Now they can locate us for the rest of our lives, which I think that's a dangerous thing, but it's out there.
That's when I brought up with the tracking the kid with my partner. His response is, you weren't tracked, you survived. Where's your kid? If your kid's young enough to not have a phone, where are they going that you aren't going to be aware of where they are? And also one of the things that I was looking at with the tracking with people, especially, and as you're watching this, if you have any teenage kids, is that at the end of the day, you got to trust your kids and let them have freedom. But I'd be terrified that my own kid would be I don't know, in California while telling me they're at their friend's house for a weekend.
Well,
but
I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but I mean, what about little Madalena Kohberger? Remember we did an episode on her and she just vanished off the face of the earth. And there have been some other recent cases of people vanishing, and people don't vanish off the face of the earth. I mean, so that's the argument, and I'm not making it. I'm just saying that argument's out there. That if these people who have disappeared were off the grid, if they had a chip, maybe you could find them. I mean, I don't know. So
now my kid's going to be the first kid. My kid's going to have the Neuralink brain thing just so that I can. This podcast is single-handedly everybody watching, with Madalena or Harmony. Obviously, they're really tragic cases, but I guess there's reason that we're all thinking about.
Well, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but as long as we're down there, and we've gotten so far off track that I don't know if we'll ever get back. I kind of forget how to get back. But suppose you decide you want to enter a life of crime. Suppose you want to be a mobster. Would you be able to get an operation to have it taken out of you?
Well, the thing is even with the chips, is that my thought, I don't know how necessarily dogs work, is that you can chip someone, but unless it's a Bluetooth chip, which I don't know how long a Bluetooth battery is going to live inside a person. It's the chip main purpose is that you would scan it. So if you want to if your kid gets chipped and they decide they want to live a life of crime, as long as they don't end up in the hospital, they should be good. I mean, no life of crimes.
To get back on the track here, the question is, one of the many questions is, if Mr. Kohberger was in fact down at the Wawa Park and he was off the grid of cell towers, would this software that Mr. Ray is developing or has developed, is it going to do the geolocation? Because so far, really, they've talked largely about the cell tower pings. Well, I have the answer to that. Let's take a look at a article. So this is a publication that's actually called Police Law Enforcement Solutions, and they had an article about the Trax software from ZX. And it starts out by explaining, have you ever had to sift through spreadsheets of data looking for that needle in a haystack that will help solve your case? So this is what we were talking about before, having all that data.
Have you ever had to sort through 52 terabytes?
Exactly. So Trax software from ZX recognizes cell phone data in any format from any provider and uses it to map the cell towers, create visuals of call information, highlight callers' habits, and even autofill search warrants. And it's simple enough that any officer can use it. Well, that's fine, and there's a little graphic showing, the type of thing that they do. And so they're talking about cell triangulation. It talks about Ray now being the president of ZX, but he started out as a police officer with the Gilbert, Arizona Police Department who wanted an easier way to use phone record data investigations through trial and error. He discovered patterns in the data and the techniques that worked for him to find useful information. But it was all done manually. So the article goes through his thought process and his technical finesse to develop this software, which, as we have seen, has had some success but some failure in court. But this answers our question. Now ZX is gearing up to roll out phase 2 of Trax, which will include an app to allow officers to receive real-time notification of a suspect's location via GPS.
Crazy.
This information can be sent to the phone of any other officer on duty via a drop-down menu to help find a suspect. But this geolocation tool can be used to locate officers as well. It puts GPS on every officer in the department who has his or her phone on. So it's a big officer safety tool, says Ray.
I think it sounds, theoretically, I like the idea of being able to have a way to just track where someone in the police department is, having everybody available and seeing what's going on with that. But at the same time, it creates a concern where if they're able to just track, suspects, who's to say, we're all human. What's the chances of someone like a bad cop using that to find someone that's not necessarily a crime suspect? I think that it theoretically has good uses, as if there's a crime in progress and you need to solve that. But that's something scary that also creates security concerns too. It kind of reminds me how when you're going through medical documents, a lot of, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've never worked in the healthcare industry, but a lot of the times they'll keep a record of who's logged in to access one information at what time, to make sure that it's being used appropriately. So that's something that I would like to see if anything like that were ever implemented. Scary.
Well, with every technology, there's good and there's bad. I mean, you go all the way back to fire. Fire is great because it lets us cook our food, but you can also burn down your enemy's house. I mean, every technology, it seems, can be used for good or used for evil. I don't want to get too philosophical, but this answers the question that if we're talking about this Trax 2 software that can both track not only the cell tower triangulation, but it can also get into the geolocation. This is something that would be highly helpful. And this may be what Ann Taylor was talking about in her motion where she responded to the request for further information on the alibi. And remember, she said something about how, they need additional information from the prosecution with respect to, are they withholding exculpatory information? We don't know. But what if they have the geolocation data from Mr. Kohberger's phone that they seized, and it has location data showing that he was anywhere but 1122 King Road on the night of November 13 at the time frame that these things happen?
And I think something like that's really important to know. I mean, and from some of the statements that they've made in the past, it almost sounds like something like that is going to come up, where it kind of makes it seem like there's been like this big, huge red flag that's been missed, and that we're slowing down, and that with Track X, that this is going to solve everything, and that this is going to be a huge game changer. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that unravels.
So a lot of other creators say there's new docs, and they put the docs up on the screen, and here's the doc that shows what the alibi was, or what's coming up in the hearing on the motion to compel. These are big issues. And Mr. Thompson, the prosecutor, has now filed a request with the court that the motion to compel be held in secret. So we just had a series of 2 hearings in this case where it was open, and poor Mr. Thompson kind of stepped on his own foot because he was saying, this stuff shouldn't be public. This stuff shouldn't be public. But he read, have you seen, heard, or read about this? So now the judge basically said, hey, you didn't ask that these hearings be held in secret. You were objecting to this material, but the material came out. So let her keep doing the survey. So it's kind of odd that these things are coming out in these documents. And I think now I know why they want to keep everything secret. And on that thought, I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts on this one?
No, I mean, I think everybody that watches our videos, it was actually kind of interesting seeing the comments about the Psy and TrackX reactions, because a lot of people that watch our videos actually think that this is going to be a huge thing and that this is going to be game changing, and we don't know.
No.
It's, I mean, this whole thing, obviously we're seeing right now, you guys are part of the experience of seeing how the public is interacting and engaging with the stuff that's come out already. But the reason that there's so many rabbit holes to go down is because things are taking as long as they are, and we don't have the information. So
no, we don't. So please, as always, we welcome your comments. And so let us know what you think. If you have information you think that we should have, that's great. What do I always say? Be kind, be respectful, whether you're in the grocery store or the parking garage, and especially down here in our comments. We don't mind if you disagree with us. That's fine. But if you start personalizing it or saying, people are pretty nasty, yeah, I have the little delete button right here. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a good week. You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.
that's that.
Where's my gavel? And that's that. And that's that.
And that's that.
Well, speaking of, where's my gavel? Give me my gavel. That's my gavel. Speaking of software, what did you think that they'll ever actually ban TikTok?
I think they just want TikTok. Will they ban it? No, because then it will be less profitable.
They just moved it back another year. We did a thing on TikTok like almost a year ago, and then they pass. It's like remember those old Roadrunner cartoons, or remember where Wile E. Coyote said, don't cross this line. That's the line. Oh no, don't cross this line. Then he'd step over that one. Don't cross this one. It's like they talked about it like a year ago. Then they said you only have 6 months. Then they just before we did this podcast about a week ago. No, we'll give you a year. Congress keeps stepping back instead. So,
we're warning you. We're warning you.
Yeah,
we're warning you.
We're gonna make you sell it. Tomorrow. No, next week. No, next year.
Next Tuesday. Next 10 years. Maybe
a horse will buy it.
Maybe a horse will.